FY23 budget. We have a placeholder meeting scheduled for tomorrow morning, if needed, for a final vote on next year's budget. But if we are efficient with our time during this meeting, succinct with our comments and questions, and are able to reach consensus, hopefully we will take up that vote tonight. So let's quickly turn to our period reserved for public comment. This is an opportunity for members of the public to address the school committee and for the committee members to directly hear your concerns and perspective. We do not respond in this context, but we will listen and seriously consider your feedback. Each of us is also available by email or phone if you wish to schedule a conversation. We have several people signed up to speak. When called, you'll be able to unmute, state your name and address, and take up to 3 minutes to share your concerns with the committee. Vice Chair Kathy Shields will give you a 30-second verbal warning before your time expires. And our first public commenter is Sherry Rice. Then our first public commenter is Kim LaQuire. Okay, sure thing. And if Sherry joins, just let me know.
My name is Kim LaQuire. I am a teacher at Bigelow Middle School. Ask anyone who has been on a 2-person or 3-person team, and I promise they will tell you that teaching 2 different subjects is nowhere near as effective as having a dedicated teacher in each content area. The amount of work that is required to maintain the level of rigor and depth that our students deserve will be nearly impossible for anyone to sustain over the course of an entire school year. It is inevitable that the quality of education Newton students will receive will decline as more and more teachers are asked to be experts in multiple content areas. Professional development we rely on to help us grow and challenge ourselves in our content areas will be taken away when we have to choose to get professional development in one subject over another. Can you imagine what that will mean for the content area that's not nourished with new ideas? To have 2 or 3-person teams will create a staffing structure that is solely built on the presumption that you have or that you will have educators who are able and willing to teach another subject. This is both a near and long-term problem for our schools. Most districts are already having difficulty finding quality candidates, and yet the assumption is that we'll be able to hire enough highly specialized, highly qualified teachers to make this happen. This will eventually drain resources, and our students and families will bear the brunt of this experiment. As our students prepare to attend high school and beyond, will they be as well prepared as those that came before them? We are Newton, and we can do better. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next public speaker is Laura Keegan.
Good evening. My name is Laura Keenan, and I live at 20 Arlington Street in Newton. As a Newton resident for the last 18 years, I purchased a home in Newton to be part of our community, to be in close proximity with Boston, and due to the high quality of our school system. As a newly married couple who was hoping to have children, the schools were a primary reason that we selected Newton over other neighboring towns, and they are certainly a factor in maintaining our property value. In making that choice, we expected to have robust offerings at all grade levels for our students to create well-rounded and educated humans on this planet. I was disappointed that the budget override failed last month. I continue to be disappointed that the city has not sought alternative funding sources to maintain the current high-quality educational offerings for our students. Cutting arts programs, physical education, and special education services, among other impacts such as larger class sizes, reduced elective offerings, is not acceptable now or ever, not to mention during this endemic period of poor student mental health and academic decline when more services are needed now than ever. If I wanted large class sizes, part-time art programs, and lacking educational services, I would have chosen another Massachusetts town. As a public sector architect, I spent years building schools for towns that had no interest in these services and these offerings for their students. I chose to invest in Newton, in our children, and in our community by living here. please find alternative funding sources to maintain the current educational programs at all levels of our school system, all ages. Thank you for prioritizing the social, emotional, and academic health of our community.
Thank you. Up next, do we have Sherry Stevens? Hi, Sherry. You may begin.
Hi, my name is Sherry Rice. I live at 23 Knapp Street in Somerville. I have been teaching at Bigelow Middle School as a social studies teacher for 14 years. I encourage you to consider reallocation of funds to our schools and to provide students with the equal education, with the quality education that they deserve. The goal stated in a previous school committee meeting was to maintain the current level of service provided to students and build a sustainable budget over time. It's impossible to cut teachers and programs and think you can maintain the current level of service without abusing the staff who remain. What will be left to the remaining staff to do is not sustainable. And worst of all, it will be the students who will suffer. With this proposed budget, which cuts teachers and programs and increases class sizes up to 28 students, NPS will be nowhere near maintaining. It will be in a steep nosedive. We are already operating as a skeleton crew at Bigelow. Due to the budget and enrollment issues last year, Bigelow lost an ELA teacher, a math teacher, a Spanish teacher, and a literacy teacher. And this year, we had a special education teacher retire. None of these positions have been filled. We have another 6 teachers retiring this year, and there are no plans to fill most of those positions for next year either. According to this budget that's proposed, some staff will be moved to part-time next year, so even more cuts. This translates to less individualized attention for students, less personalized feedback, less interventions, less enrichment, fewer opportunities for student connections with peers and with teachers. All of this will undoubtedly increase academic anxiety for our students. These cuts equal less staff to coach, less staff to plan trips and special events, fewer electives, fewer enrichment, less extracurriculars. Ultimately, fewer opportunities that will help our students grow. Newton is going to become synonymous with less. I want to see a budget that shows that we're in this together, the city and the teachers, in a way that really puts the kids first. How does it feel to hear about all this loss? For 2.5 minutes, you just heard about all the fewer that your students will be experiencing. But these students will be experiencing that every single day next year. It's a long list, and we're talking about just one school. There must be a better way to move forward with our students' education as our priority. Thank you for this opportunity to speak.
Thank you. So thanks to you and to everyone who spoke. We very much appreciate hearing your perspective. Our public comment is now closed. And we'll turn to our interim superintendent update.
Thank you. I want to start by congratulating our Mass Ready team. You've heard me talk about this since we were selected, and we were actually one of just 2 teams that were district teams that attended the sessions back in the fall. Also, we took part in our own training in what we call the RIDES, part of this Foundation Learning Series. So today was our culminating event. We actually met again in person in Marlborough all day. So I want to first congratulate Liam Hurley, Aisha Farag, Renee McCall, Kathy Lopes, Casey No Miller, Toby Roma, and myself as part of this group. I'm always so proud today we actually did some roundtables, and we heard there were 6 areas, depending on where you were. You can imagine with the work that's been done in Newton, we were one of the more advanced groups there. So we were able to hear about the work that happened throughout the state. It's hard work. It involves a commitment from a district, commitment from your teachers, your families, et cetera. So I want to thank the team today that I know presented in groups. I got to listen to a few of them. And I know this is work that will continue certainly for years to come. And secondly, I do want to mention, back when you heard me talk, if any of you remember back in July when I was first here, I talked about getting a whirlwind tour of all of your schools in the district from my mentor, Dr. Jim Marini. And at the time, I remember going to Oak Hill and Jim telling me the story about 4 young students who were killed. Today is actually 22 years ago to the day. And I can remember getting out of the car, going up to the school, hearing the story, and just feeling, imagining a superintendent, imagining families, imagining a city, that had to deal with this particular loss. So I want to remind everybody that on April 27th, 2001, a bus carrying 42 members of the Oak Hill Middle School band, 5 chaperones, 2 drivers, crashed on a Canadian highway in Sussex, New Brunswick, killing 4 students. Stephen Glidden, Greg Chan, Kayla Rosenberg, and Melissa Luong. And tonight, the mayor and myself attended virtually with Principal John Hartunian there, with Elaine Albert, who is the mother, I believe, of Stephen Glidden, and had a circle of remembrance. And myself, having lost a family member to a tragic accident very suddenly, one of the things I do know, and the mom said this, it's just a hole in your heart that you never recover from. And I will tell you, one of the most interesting things as I listened to the circle of remembrance, and it was just beginning, both the mayor and I had to leave, but Stephen's grandmother, Lil Albert, got on the Zoom, 105 years old, and talked about the impact on her life. And I loved when she said, these were 4 angels that we're remembering today. So Mayor, I thank you for inviting me, to come and at least certainly represent, from all of us. But I don't know, Mayor, if you want to say anything, I'd like to ask for a moment after you're finished.
I'm not sure there's anything more awful than losing a child. And for Elaine and Bill, this circle, which is the 22nd year that they've actually pulled the community together. I just, for all 4 families, for all their classmates who knew them, all that loved them, I echo what Kathy Smith said. They are in our hearts, they are in our thoughts, and we remember.
Of course.
So I remember that day very clearly. I remember hearing the news and saying, I hope I don't know those kids. And I was Melissa's soccer coach. And the hole is still there. The happy memory of Melissa was she wasn't a very good soccer goalie. She would play with great spirit, and then when she would punt the ball out, she would tend to kick it over her head into our goal backwards. And so while it's always a sad day to remember, I have that happy memory of her also. It makes me smile a little bit. Thanks for mentioning it, Kathy.
I'd ask for just a moment of remembrance for our students and families. Thank you. That was my update.
Thank you, Kathy. Thank you for sharing that very moving memory, Paul. It's tough. No. Okay, that is a hard piece to follow, but we will move on to our consent agenda. And there are a few items for us to consider tonight. We have a Vote to approve the sunsetting of the GBEF vaccination policy as of May 11th, 2023. Approval of the last day of school as Wednesday, June 21st, 2023. Approval of an out-of-state field trip as detailed in the memo from Toby Romer, and approval of minutes from the November 17th meeting. Does anyone wish to remove an item from the consent agenda for further consideration? Seeing none, is there a motion to accept the consent agenda?
I move that we approve the consent agenda.
Thank you, Emily. Is there a second? Thank you, Paul. We have a motion and a second to approve all items on the consent agenda, and we'll take a roll call vote. Ward 1,
Yes.
Ward 2,
Yes.
Ward 3,
Yes.
Ward 4, yes. Ward 5,
Yes.
Ward 6.
Yes.
Ward 7,
Yes.
Ward 8,
Yes.
Mayor Fuller.
Yes.
All right, that consent agenda passes unanimously. Thank you, everyone. Continuing to our items for updates and discussions, we have our first item is a system-wide goals update on social and emotional learning. For this, we have Casey No Miller, our Assistant Superintendent for Student Services. She is joined by Jessie Krodick, Elementary SEL Coordinator, and Maria Colby, SEL Coach. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for being with us tonight.
All right. Good evening, school committee members. It is my privilege tonight to introduce you to two not just incredible human beings, but professionals who are experts in what they do, and you'll see that tonight. So our social emotional learning work at our elementary schools is a partnership between the Office of Student Services and the Office of Elementary Education. And you hear a lot more tonight about our SEL coaching and SEL interventionist work at our elementary schools. So I will not delay this. I want to introduce you to first Maria Colby, who is a social emotional learning coach, and Jessie Krodick, who is the coordinator of elementary support stabilization and MTSS. It is.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for having us. We're here to speak a little bit about the social emotional learning coach position at our elementary schools. And we thought it made sense to start with some context so we all understand what we're talking about here when we're talking about social and emotional learning. What you see here is the CASEL wheel. CASEL is the collaborative for academic and social emotional learning, which is really sort of the gold standard of social emotional frameworks with which we work off of. And as you'll see here, it highlights, the core features of social and emotional learning is the explicit instruction of these core competencies that you see here in the middle. But of equal importance are the relationships that we form between our teachers, our educators, and our students, as well as the partnerships that we foster between our schools, our communities, and our families. And it's the cultures and the climates within our schools that provide a safe learning environment that allow our educators to thrive and meet the needs of our students, and also allow our students to take appropriate, healthy academic, social, and emotional risks throughout their day so that they can flourish as students. And it's this work, it's these conditions that we try to create within our schools, and we all try to create within our community that we know improves student outcomes and increases equitable learning opportunities for our students.
So I'm going to talk a little bit about what grounds our work here in MPS. So the quick, easy answer here is what you have all given to us. So it's the district-wide educational goal 3, which is on social emotional well-being. This certainly anchors our work and has anchored our reflection and how we achieve this goal. You certainly know this goal. We're not going to go over it here. But what the work of our department has really been, how do we make this a reality within our schools, and how do we capture the work that is happening? How do we look for areas that we want to grow and we want to support? And so CASEL has been very helpful in giving us this framework of how do we look at a strong tier one, meaning what do we want all students to have access to within our schools? What are the components that really lead to that really robust, really strong tier one social emotional development for our students? So that explicit SEL instruction, those instructional practices, what are our teacher moves? What are we doing as educators? That integration within the student's entire school day, which we certainly know is where the magic is for our social emotional learning, where we really see the impact and we see that integrated across our school day. And then to Jesse's point, those strategies around culture and climate so that our classrooms and our communities are safe, productive learning environments for our students and for our staff. So this is certainly a very helpful framework. We're thankful to CASEL for it. The feedback that we've received from educators is that they want more specificity, more concrete, actionable steps. What is social emotional learning in Newton Public Schools? So what you see on the next slide is a result of our collaboration with multiple departments, many incredible individuals and educators, certainly worked on very closely with the DEI department to really define and answer that question of just how are we defining social emotional learning work in our schools. So we started calling this like our swoop, which like we're super open to feedback, doesn't need to stay swoop. But
We're not sure it's a word, actually.
yeah, we're actually not sure. But yes, this is our pathway, our path, our roadmap to achieving that district-wide goal 3. Meaning that this starts with what are our core beliefs about students, around social emotional learning? What do we believe about student behavior and how we interface with that reality for our students? Then going to the green boxes, and this is where we've really focused as an elementary level, our work with our buildings, thinking, what are those rituals and routines that we see alive in those classrooms that we want to have equity of student experience, no matter what classroom they're in, what grade level, what school, what do we want to see alive and what do we see alive, certainly in terms of rituals and routines that students are exposed to every single day. Then that next green bucket is a little more like a toolbox. I think about my building a lot that I'm at 0.5. When we have a staff meeting, we have 90 educators in our cafeteria. Individuals across many different roles, many different life experiences, educational backgrounds, life experiences. How do we have a common backpack, a common toolbox that when students need more from us, that we have a common language, that we have a confidence around what tools we have to use to meet their needs? So that's what that is in that section of teacher moves is intended to capture there. A big piece there also that we did a lot of collaboration and thinking about was how to remove a lot of the acronyms that are thrown at our general educators in particular, and to get away from this idea of like, okay, we're going to put on our CRI hat right now for this part, and then we're going to put on our SEL hat, and then, oh, let's make sure we do our UDL hat for this part, kind of taking this away. I think the first 3 items there are a really good example. Those are 3 components of a trauma-informed classroom. The first two are the components that were presented to our DEI teams district-wide by the DEI department this summer as CRI practices that are the higher leverage practices to focus on. And then thinking also about UDL and student choice and voice, that's certainly captured there with that second. So with us really looking at the research in terms of what are evidence-based practices, but what are also high leverage practices, like how do we cut through some of those acronyms that are thrown at educators, and what do we say? What's the core work that we see and that research shows us is really beneficial for our students and can impact student outcomes the way that we would like to see. Then we go into the yellow, which is instruction of some kind, and certainly this captures curriculum, something like Mind Up, an evidence-based tool, or evidence-based curriculum. Those are lessons, 20 to 30-minute lessons. But instruction also is the 5 minutes before a math lesson when an educator knows they're introducing a new math game that's going to have a collaborative element maybe that hasn't been done before. And so they're going to take that 5 minutes and really give some explicit practice and instruction around conflict resolution. Or, we have some of our games in our math curriculum where there's a quick losing that happens right away, which doesn't always go over so well in a kindergarten or first grade classroom in the first time that they experience the game. So doing that teaching of the explicit SEL skill so that academic access can happen when that game is presented. So instruction doesn't just mean a lesson time, it also means explicit attention throughout the day to skill building related to social emotional learning and related to ABAR work. This is also a good example of, not working within silos. So thinking about, 2 of the 3 ABAR instruction elements on there are housed within our literacy department. And then the Social Justice Library is a collaboration from our department in DEI. So thinking about how we come together to address some of these larger themes. And then the purple is our, just the statement around that when all of this is alive in a classroom, it's something that is intentionally applied throughout the entire school day, leading us to the intervention work. So everything really up to that blue box, we think of as tier 1, meaning what we want all students to access and all students to experience. We have had the pleasure over the last several years to work with our SEL interventionists within our buildings, and we've really flushed out a lot of what's in that blue box there. So what is a tier 2 and tier 3 intervention for SEL? What does intervention look like? What are those evidence-based practices, such as the check-in, check-out system? What progress monitoring are we using? How are we embedding database decision-making into those criteria for exit for intervention for SEL? So the tier 2, tier 3 work is kind of held within that. So, whether you think of it as a swoop or a roadmap or a path, it's kind of, this is where we have come to define this very concretely, thinking about, this is how we achieve some of our social emotional learning outcomes for students that we want to see. I also view it as a celebration. I think about this is alive in our classrooms and in our schools. So the last thing we would ever want to imply by sharing this is a new document this year. That doesn't mean the work is new. It doesn't mean that the commitment to this is new. But we felt that it was really important to capture the tremendous work that is happening by general educators within our buildings. And then also give a tool to schools when there is a new teacher that's hired, when there is, I think about so many talented educators that are tremendous educators, both in their skill in teaching academics, but also in their equity work and in their SEL work. And this year they've had to be creative in ways that they haven't had to before. And so for those educators as well, when they have to say, well, wait, my toolbox isn't working the way it used to, is there a resource they can look at and say, okay, well, maybe this is something that I can look a little deeper in, or I can get a little more guidance for, as many of our educators are, and as we are being more creative than we have been in the past to meet student need, the students that are in front of us at this moment in time. So really, this is a celebration of what is happening within our schools, but then also thinking about how we want to continue to maintain that equity of student experience over time and across all of our schools. And it has to start from us as a department defining what we're calling social emotional learning. And so the last thing I'll say before Jesse goes into the next piece is that we, as you put it, that, part of through this work of developing this framework, and the reason really we're sharing this is because this directly ties into the position that Jesse's going to talk about today, that no one position certainly could own the professional learning or the management of all this work that happens within a school, but that we've been thinking really intentionally about how we support classrooms in a lot of these elements, especially the green elements there. And that leads us to what we're presenting to you on today around a position that we've put into place this year.
So as Maria said, this year is our first year, although it's not our first year doing this work, it is our first year having an SEL coach. And we're thrilled that we've been able to have SEL coaches at 4 of our schools. As you see here, 3 of them are 0.5. One of them is 0.6, funded through Title I funds at Lincoln Elliott. We chose the 3 schools. Maria is also an MTSS coach in the district, and we chose Ainger, Cabot, and Franklin because they were already on board and doing some MTSS work using data to make decisions and thinking about tiered interventions from a systemic viewpoint. And so it made sense to start there. And then thinking about the coach position, you saw our roadmap, our swoop, our framework. This coach position is primarily responsible for looking at those tier 1 practices in our schools, building wides, and in our classrooms. Like any other content area, whether it's math or literacy, our educators are oftentimes in different places or at different comfort level. And so we provide individualized support for our teachers. And this can look like modeling, the teacher moves, the classroom practices, the explicit instruction of the SEL lessons. We're excited that a lot of our buildings right now have solid PLC structures and have social and emotional learning coaches and or mental health teams rounding through to look at data, to problem solve, to think proactively how to best meet students' needs and how to respond to student need when it arises in the classroom or in the building. And they also work very closely with our SEL interventionists, managing those tier 2 and tier 3 interventions along with them. And then developing content and providing professional learning experiences for our educators. That swoop there not only is our roadmap for implementation, but it's also our roadmap for professional learning. And so a big part of the work that we're trying to do is to get this off the ground, is to provide robust professional learning experiences for our educators across the district. Just to be sort of explicit about the difference between an SEL interventionist and an SEL coach, I'm not going to repeat myself with regards to what an SEL coach is. The main difference here is that our SEL interventionists are generally speaking providing tier 2 and tier 3 evidence-based interventions for students who have been identified of needing such intervention. They also provide crisis support as needed in our buildings, to be used flexibly as needed to support students. And when they can, support those tier 1 priorities as well. This here really illustrates, I think we felt like we had to put an MTSS triangle on our slideshow because we have to, but really what this illustrates here in my mind is that all learning is social emotional learning, really that everybody in our building, there's positions that we didn't even list here that we probably should have. Truly everybody in our building has an opportunity to model, to teach, and to reinforce social and emotional learning skills throughout the tiers. So why do we need this now? You know, I've thought about this and we've talked about this quite a bit, probably, as you can imagine. This is my 13th year in the district, and in the 13 years that I've been here, I myself and many of our colleagues have talked about the ways in which we have seen the students that are coming into our school, starting in kindergarten, has changed over time. And they're not coming with the same level of skills that they once did. And so when I think about this, certainly there's many students who come to our schools and they have all these skills and they excel. But there's clearly more of a need to provide students across the board with these sorts of explicit skill instruction that we haven't done in the past. And that largely, in my mind, at least in our mind, has to do with what we're not seeing in some of our students. We're seeing students who appear to be less mature and to have less skills that we once sort of assumed students would have, social and emotional skills that we assumed students once had when they came to us. And we're just seeing less of that now. So again, the need to really address this on a tier 1 level, rather than just thinking about grouping students for intervention. The need is that great.
So I'm going to talk a bit about how we are measuring impact this year, but really the message here is also about how we continue to measure impact moving forward. I think about we have measured impact a few different ways this year at our buildings. These are the ways that, the student screener data is certainly one way. At the school I'm at, we've been able to look at our impact that way around social emotional behavioral screener that is given to that educators fill out to capture student well-being at the same frequency that we take data for our math and ELA interventions 3 times a year. So we've done that twice already. We'll do it one more time. That's one way we can look at student trends over time and measure that more kind of global student well-being, as well as the impact of our intervention work with students. Maybe the most concrete is student goal attainment. So students that are receiving tier 2 and tier 3 interventions, that if their goal is on frustration tolerance, how are we measuring that there were 5 behavioral episodes and now we're down to 1, or maybe we're still at 5, and then that tells us we need to adjust what we're doing. But we're looking at, for our students that are in tier 2 and tier 3 interventions, a very targeted skill-based focus. What is that one skill we're going to really target and really work on and teach, generalize, and then fade and look for that self-monitoring component for students too. Fidelity of implementation, we do a fidelity tool that aligns with this framework that we do not have in practice this year, but we can certainly moving forward. We have looked, though, thinking about those green boxes at fidelity of implementation. I can think about classrooms and where we've had to be very creative to meet the student needs in front of us. And so we've had to go much heavier on certain elements than we have in the past. And I can see that there's a fidelity of implementation because of support that has been able to be provided. Office referral data is also another data source that is one quantitative data point certainly, but is a kind of big picture measurement of student well-being certainly. It's imperfect in that it measures externalizers generally and externalizing behavior, but that is certainly one data point. Perhaps this year, what we have found the most impactful in terms of measuring our impact is educator confidence. So I've worked with so many wonderful educators in my building that have had to, as we've mentioned, be creative because their toolbox has not worked the way that it's worked before. And so that is, as you can imagine, as an educator, a very deflating feeling like, well, this toolbox has worked for me really effectively for a long time. And I can't get through a math lesson because I'm stopping 17 times and I'm calling the office. And, to me, a measure of educator confidence that is certainly a qualitative one, but how is educator confidence improving when that partnering happens in the classroom, when someone is able to be in there to be able to problem solve and come up with new strategies and new tools and think very much outside the box, then how do we come back, and then how is that educator able to then approach the math block moving forward? Are they able to feel confident that no matter what comes their way, they're going to feel confident that they have a toolbox or at least a different way of approaching something than they maybe would have in the past? But we mention all these things to say that we, this year, in our attempt to measure impact, it illustrated for us something we certainly already knew, but just made very obvious for us, which was a hole from our department level in quantitative data measurement for student emotional well-being. And so on our next slide here, we'll talk about something very exciting for next year.
We are very excited. We're going to be partnering with Panorama, which is a local company, in fact, that provides social emotional learning screeners. So we, Maria mentioned that we used the SABRS, which was the social emotional behavioral screener that we've used really in small pockets throughout our elementary schools. And what partnering with Panorama, we really are going to be able to screen all of our students. We're going to start small, but the goal is to be able to screen all of our students so we can have a really sense of, just as we do with math and with literacy and any other academic content area, we have a baseline with regards to understanding our students' skills and understanding what sorts of skills that we need to further develop. Prior to this, we've had really no quantitative social emotional learning data. So we're really excited. We'll be rolling this out in September to begin to screen students in the fall. We'll do this 3 times a year. Some of our schools, as I mentioned before, are further along in this process with regards to making database decisions. And so some of those buildings might be screening all of their students. Other buildings might start with grades and sort of build capacity and increase the amount of students that we're screening from there. But this is a really, to us, this feels very exciting because prior to this, and in fact, right now, we don't have a sense outside of the qualitative, which is very valuable, how our elementary age students are doing.
And so the last thing to share here briefly, we just in terms of the measures, the quantitative and qualitative measures we do have to reflect on this position and think about the impact that has happened. Here's a quantitative snapshot of one school that utilizes more quantitative data that does do the current SEB screener multiple times a year. Thinking about the structural pieces that were able to be put in place from the SEL coach that led to more student access and better student outcomes. So the first piece here is that the SEL interventionist or SEL coach completed that targeted skill-based intervention with 29 regular education students from that period of time, September to February. And then looking at our SEB screener data, universal screener data from October to February, 73% of those students were no longer clinically at risk in February when they were in October. So that's an incredibly big data point to celebrate. Similarly, thinking about the check-in, check-out Tier 2 intervention system, which is really the Tier 2 evidence-based intervention that raises academic engagement while also supporting SEL competency growth as well. Last year in this building, 14 students were part of that program. It started in January. This past year, it started in September, and 26 students have been a part of that program. And 100% of students in that building that are receiving Tier 3 interventions have weekly progress monitoring. So again, speaking to the systems and structures that can be overseen and supported by this position that directly impacts student outcomes. And then we have some qualitative measures here, which we're certainly not going to read these, but we had asked for feedback from the building anonymously, certainly from anyone across our 4 buildings that wanted to share feedback, constructive certainly as well, for on the position as we think about our reflection and moving forward. And so we included 6 of them here, from educators, principals, and a psychologist, really the themes being the educators talking about having the value of having someone with them to problem solve in the moment in their classroom, and then continue to come in and be with them in their classrooms to work through these situations. And then the principals and school psychologists spoke to more to those structural pieces and building that muscle of database decision-making and intervention work, and having someone that can think about those tier 1 structures and systems from, what do we need to have in place to support our educators, which is always the purpose of any coach. Like how are we facilitating our educators feeling as confident as they can be to meet the needs of students in front of them. And then some of our reflections, just, some of this it was very similar when we, no, you're good. Our successes were the same of what many individuals mentioned. So like the part I think about myself and my time in my school 0.5, without a doubt, my most effective time in that building was time when I was in a classroom with a general educator during a writing block, during an ELA block, working through a really challenging, writer's workshop and thinking about how we could structure things a bit differently, or how we could think about 3 students engagement, or how we could do some pre-teaching of some certain skills so that tomorrow that the lesson will go a bit more smoothly for all students, including the students that maybe we're not accessing in that moment. So I think that time partnering with educators being the most successful. Close second, though, certainly is joining those grade level PLCs in the afternoons on Wednesday. So when we've had that quantitative data, but also when we've had the qualitative, being able to be a part of those PLC structures and brainstorming with grade levels regarding what are our next steps to meet the needs of all students as creatively as we need to. And then thinking about that collaboration between the interventionist and SEL coach. We've supported the SEL interventionist position for many years in a variety of ways. And I have tremendous respect for the position. I always will. And I think this year I've just even grown in my appreciation for what it can be, especially with this kind of marriage in some ways, having an SEL coach that can really anchor in tier 1 and in general educator support when it's needed. And then having an interventionist that is so skilled and can really focus on that tier 2, tier 3 work, as well as crisis response in the building when it's needed, because that does something so important for the community when the community of educators know that when something happens, support will be there. And I'm going to be okay. If I don't know what to do and I try something and I take a risk and it doesn't go incredibly well, and now we have a situation, there's a structure in the building where I'm going to have a partner that can respond quickly and will partner with me in that work and knowing what to do. And our SEL interventionists are incredibly skilled in that work, as well as other individuals in the building as well, of course, but that's certainly a core element of their job. So thinking about those 2 positions together, some of the challenges just as a reflection is I think we could probably have a 2.0 coach in every school and it wouldn't feel like enough, but just the 0.5 allocation, not being in the building full time, and then just the competing demands for time, certainly our days are quite full. So finding the time to do some of the pre-teaching, and for sometimes and the explicit instruction that's needed to prepare one of our core content lessons to be able to run the way it needs to be run can be significant. And so just the time piece of that, but overall, we've really enjoyed our first year in the position.
So thinking about next year, we're going to be slightly restructuring the way that we've distributed the FTEs for this position, so that we'll be able to be in, depending on how things shake out, 6 or 7 of our elementary schools next year at a 0.5 level. We are constantly seeking feedback from our colleagues, from students, from families, to see how we can further develop this position, further refine the work. And we're really excited about having some quantified social and emotional learning data through Panorama. It's really gonna it's gonna change our work in a big way and really improve student outcomes, which we're really excited about. Thank you.
Thank you. It was a wonderful presentation. Opening it up for questions from the members and from our student rep, if you'd like.
Yes.
Go ahead on Ping and then Rajiv.
Thank you. I'm very excited about this whole framework And we've been talking about social emotional learning probably for the past 2 decades.
Yeah.
But now this is serious and now put into practice, as we all know that there are 3 system-wide goals, and, social emotional well-being is one of them. So, but I'm new to this framework. I'm just curious now, probably could give me a quick kind of a snapshot of 0.5 position day work, what kind of work they're doing at school, interacting with teachers and special educators, parents, community. So give me a little bit sense.
Sure. So I would say it's been it's the point of any coaching position is that we also meet the needs of our current school. So like a school that has 5 new teachers, the coach's job is very different than like a seasoned faculty. I happen to be in a building that has no new teachers. It's a very seasoned building. So my coaching does not need to be necessarily teaching the components of what those rituals and routines are, for example, or like what is a morning meeting or what are certain things, maybe an educator that's new to the field, I don't need to do that work. So for me, in my building, so 0.5 is I'm at my building every morning till 11:30 and what my role there is, my goal is 2/3 of my time would be spent in general education classrooms. So I think of my role the same way we think of our SEL interventionists, is my job in like 6 to 8 week chunks. So thinking of responding to the data of my building, what are my priorities for these next 6 to 8 weeks? Whether it'll be certain classrooms, certainly it might be certain pockets of students. So that's how I would determine on a 2 months at a time, mostly, what classrooms I'm in for those 2.5 hours a day. And when I'm in the classroom, I'm most likely either co-teaching a lesson with a teacher, or I might be working with a small group of students. I'm not like observing. That's not really, I don't know. I'm not a particularly good observer, I suppose. I'm going to jump in. And then I would say anywhere from 30 minutes to half an hour of the day would be doing check-ins with SEL interventionists, doing check-ins with students, checking in with the principal, other members of the mental health team. So there's an element there, like how are the systems going? I might be checking in on like the check-in, check-out. So I would think, 2/3 in classrooms, general educators, working with general educators or working directly with students, and then 1/3 doing collaboration work with other individuals in the building, or working on systems work, or checking in on those types of things. I don't know if that answered it specifically enough. I can be more specific if it's helpful too, but.
Can I ask one more question? Thank you. I know it's a little bit hard for you to describe it, because in a sense, kind of jack of all trades, students, all kind of needs and social emotional. And second thing is that I'm very excited to hear the data, the screener data, and this is something new. And I recall that our incoming superintendent, Anna Nolan, mentioned that in her district, she's already doing that. And that's one of the reasons I was so excited she'll come here, because talking about data, and then you can measure their progress, their growth. Otherwise, you did the work and next year still move to other class, other school, and you don't have data, and then you have to start again, and sometimes just left in the crack and until the things getting really bad. So give me some sense about this data, this panorama system.
When I briefly went through the slide, I mentioned the teacher report screeners, which are subjective teacher report screeners, trying to identify student skill level. What's also included, the other screeners that we'll be able to use are for grades 3 through 5, a student self-report survey. So students feel, how supported do students feel, how safe do students feel, how do they feel about their education? There's also parent screeners that we could send out. I'm actually a resident of Natick, so I received the screener that Anna had sent out. So this is another way of engaging with families, partnering with families to get a sense of how they feel like their students are doing. And the goal here is to use the screener 3 times per year, fall, winter, and spring. and plan interventions based on that data. The other really exciting piece about this data is the implications for identifying opportunities for growth at a tier 1 level. So in other words, if a certain amount of, I believe it's greater than 30%, I think we're talking about, a greater than 30% of our students in a classroom meet a clinically significant level for intervention, that tells us that there's tier 1 work that needs to be done. Perhaps there's some intervention that needs to be done also, but how can we strengthen the tier 1 instruction to better support all students?
And so for an example, we have some schools that have used in pockets a current social emotional behavior screener now, and I score them. So I know all of them, I see them, but I think about, so often I score for a classroom, and anywhere from 50 to 60% of a class will come out as elevated in emotional behavior, for example. So we're not going to pull, I don't know the math on that. We're not going to pull 16 students for intervention. We're going to say, okay, this is an incredibly high portion of the class that is struggling with emotional regulation on a national screener. This is not a Newton screener. This is saying this is a clinically significant data point for sure. We need to look at how this classroom is supporting all students, and that's going to be the most effective way to move that needle, so that when we give the screener again in 3 months, that number is not that high anymore. Maybe we're down to 20% of the students, and then we can look at more targeted interventions for them. So I think the current screener we've been using for that is the social emotional behavioral screener. It doesn't give us the action steps the way the Panorama one will. The Panorama will give us much clearer, I think much more concrete ways that we can support classrooms and thinking, wow, that number is big. And hopefully we don't continue to see numbers that high, although many numbers are that high right now. So it's reasonable to think there's going to be times where even when we do Panorama in the fall, classrooms where 50% of a class is coming out elevated in certain areas, that we would want to be able to, Panorama will give us that lens of how we then think, okay, how do we creatively think about that, what that classroom needs? We can't achieve any of our district goals with that level of need of dysregulation that may be happening in a classroom. So yeah, we're very excited for what Panorama will bring us.
Did we answer your question?
Okay, well, it's broad, definition, but I know any system takes time, and we don't have any example. Even here, we can look at how it was done. But I appreciate it. Probably in the future, you guys can provide some kind of samples.
Oh yeah.
And because I like to see you have the students would do that, and teacher would do.
Oh yeah.
And then parents would do that.
Yes, that's right.
And you combine all the data together to create a kind of student profile.
That's right.
And you said you score them.
I do score the current. Yes, that's not a sustainable.
Oh,
We won't be doing that.
Oh no.
Because that's impossible.
That's
No, that's impossible.
No, Panorama is a very sophisticated platform. It analyzes all the data for us, and it spits out very attractive and usable graphs for us to look at.
Yes.
Okay, and then the related work.
Yes.
Okay,
No.
that's
My
so.
days are over. Yes.
Yeah.
So in the future, I know that this will add tremendous work to the system, right? Or Panorama would help to manage data, or the data will give to the Newton school system, and we would do the data, analysis or management.
Yeah. The analysis will be done for us. The Panorama will analyze the data. We're going to action step the data. What we're currently helping schools do is think about, what do we do once we have this data? What are our intervention structures?
So Panorama will provide school report for individual students.
That's right.
Yes.
Okay.
Individual students report. I mean, you can drill down in any direction with this data. Individual student, classroom, building, district. We're very excited.
And we were on a call this morning where they even spoke about how they can gather information for, quarterly reports to bodies like yourself.
Right.
So it's going, it will all be available.
Wonderful.
Absolutely.
So this only starting at the elementary school now,
That's right.
and eventually we'll move to middle school and high school
I can't speak to that.
because of budget or
I
other reasons.
can't speak to it simply
Yes.
because we're only elementary.
Okay. Well, let me stop here. I know my colleagues might have more questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Anupeng. All good questions. Go ahead, Rajiv.
Thank you. This was helpful. The first question is really elementary, and I should know the answer. What is a PLC?
No, that's not that's absolutely not an English question. So a professional learning community. So when our school day ends at 12:30, our general educators have professional learning communities, which means if there's 4 teachers on a first grade in a school, there are 4 teachers that are teaching first grade. They have a professional learning community from 1 to 3 that day, where they're working together to analyze student data, look at upcoming units of study, look at previous student data. And what many of our elementary schools have done is having coaches round through those Wednesday afternoons. So for example, my Wednesday afternoons, from 1 to 2 o'clock go to second grade, and from 2 to 3 o'clock, I'll go to third grade. And so of those 2 hours, and the way it's structured in my building, the general educators have an hour to themselves for what they need to do and an hour with one of their coaches. So that every month they have an hour with their math coach, and an hour with their SEL coach, and an hour with their literacy specialist.
Right. And we're also trying to create structures that exist in some schools where mental health teams are also rounding through those PLCs.
In the
For this-
absence of an SEL coach.
That's right.
Got it.
So that's a really just important structure for any sort of MTSS model. That's the critical structure for us to be able to do the work, is to have the time to reflect on student data and then make the plans for how we're going to provide intervention, or go back and reteach a whole unit because a large number of students did not get did not reach the outcomes we wanted them to reach. So that's the Wednesday afternoon time we have together.
Thank you. And just a quick follow-up, you mentioned MTSS. Have you seen any decrease in the requirement for tier 1 supports over the past year or year and a half? Or has it?
What do you mean by tier 1 supports?
So post-pandemic, what we have heard across the board from at all levels of schools is some level of social emotional challenges in a very broad sense, right, across all students, and then of course more significant ones for smaller subsets of students for whom distance learning or socialization or whatever else was just more challenging.
Yeah,
I know we don't have the quantitative data for that, but qualitatively, do you have any insights or thoughts in terms of what's been happening?
So I coordinate social emotional learning. I also have the privilege of supervising the social workers and our elementary stabilization and support team. And so I can speak from all 3 of those perspectives. And I can say in all 3 of those areas, the need has increased significantly since before the pandemic. And as I mentioned during our slides, I think we've been seeing that need increase over time. People have lots of different theories why that may be. But it's become more clear since after the pandemic that both the needs of our students have increased, and quite frankly, the needs of our families have increased significantly. Did that answer your question? Great, thank you.
Thanks, Rajiv. Go ahead, Emily, and then Paul.
First of all, thank you so much for coming and presenting. This is really informative, and I greatly appreciate the information. I'm going to ask what is a ridiculous question in light of the budget discussion that we're about to be having, but is the end goal in an ideal universe that we would have an SEL coach embedded in each of our elementary schools?
That's right.
Okay, that's my only question. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Emily. Go ahead, Paul.
Thank you. Jesse, let me just follow up on your answer to Rajiv, because early on you mentioned also that you were seeing problems even in kindergarten students.
Certainly.
And is it your judgment that that's COVID related also? In other words, and
you asked my opinion?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Certainly more informed than mine. And if so, can we expect those problems to diminish in future cohorts of kindergartners?
It's a great question, and I wish I had a crystal ball. I can give you my opinion, which is that, again, in the 12, 13 years I've been here, I've seen a decrease in those skills, and I think it has, at the risk of sounding like somebody who said that rock and roll was going to destroy the United States of America, I think that screens have a lot to do with this. And I think that our young people aren't outside playing, learning to resolve disputes, solve problems, self-regulate on their own, because they're spending so much time in front of the screen. I think that the school closure and COVID simply exacerbated that. And so the reason I mentioned kindergarten is because our kindergartners are coming in with looking far less mature, having the school skills or the again, the ability to self-regulate or to solve problems or to effectively communicate, oftentimes looking sort of like a preschooler in terms of skill development. And so again, speaking to when I first got here, I would not have said that all of our classrooms necessarily need robust tier 1 social emotional learning, explicit social emotional learning instruction, mostly because so many of these kids came with those skills, and the students who didn't receive intervention, and fewer and fewer of those kids are coming with those skills now, which again, in our mind, speaks to the need for that explicit tier 1 instruction. Will it get better? I sure hope so. I wish I could answer that, but I don't think I can.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Paul. Any other questions or comments? Go ahead, Max.
Hi, thank you very much. My question is, you mentioned that sometimes the teacher has to kind of take a step back and redo units or focus on the social emotional learning of the classroom. Do you ever feel like this comes at the cost of raw academic instruction? And how is this balance kind of made between the social emotional learning and the raw academic?
No, absolutely. And certainly when we think about social emotional learning, I think I mentioned briefly before, but what we really want is what's in that purple of that framework, where this is work that's embedded throughout the whole day, those few minutes here and there where we're giving explicit instruction, we're previewing something that's going to happen, we're working on a specific skill. When we talk about whole class work, right? I think when we think about explicit SEL instruction at the elementary level, to speak to Jesse's point, what we're seeing is that in the absence of that social emotional learning instruction, whether it's 20 minutes a couple times a week, or 30 minutes twice a week, whatever it happens to be for that individual group of learners, that in the absence of doing that the effectiveness of the educational lessons is incredibly diminished, because students aren't utilizing, if a take a break space in the classroom that uses taught self-regulation strategies, that also includes a conflict resolution visual that's been explicitly taught and modeled and practiced as young as 5-year-olds. If that work isn't done, then in the math lesson example I give, when they switch to their 20-minute game application, students aren't taking in the math information because they can't get past who goes first. So I think absolutely this is something we're always thinking about. And when we talk about competing time, our end goal is always in the integration, but that and I think that's part of when we've thought about the coach position, having an individual that can collaborate at the PLC level to help grade levels make those choices. Because I think about at my building, there are grade levels that spend very little time doing the 20-minute lessons that I just mentioned. And there are grade levels that have to do them every day. And if they didn't do them every day, they would never get through their ELA workshop. And so it's about, again, that idea of using all the data that's in front of you, which the data we have most readily available to us as educators and as general educators is who's in front of you in your classroom and what are your students showing you they need. So it's not a concrete answer, which is, we live in the ambiguity, I suppose, with some of this, or the individualization, I guess is a better way to say it. It has to be individualized with what is needed, because academic excellence is, the high academic expectations is why we come to work every day. That's what we want for all students. It happens to be that our skill set is helping think about what are those social emotional bolsterings and instructions that need to happen so that academic excellence can happen in a classroom. And for some classrooms, that's an incredibly flawless, simple formula. And in some classrooms, it's a much more complex puzzle. And so I think that's kind of where our work lives right now. But thank you. It's a great question.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Max. So my own question kind of was along the same lines as Max, and in a different way. I heard you, Maria, earlier say that teaching SEL skills so that academic access can happen. And my question for you, and especially in terms, both of you, especially in terms of the Panorama software, is how are you thinking about quantifying that correlation between SEL and academic access over time? So I don't know if the Panorama can import into Aspen or I don't know. Talk to me about what you might aspire to,
Well,
this year or in the
I
future.
could start. I mean, what, you know, what would the,
Oh.
yeah, yeah.
So the money that's associated for our new data analytics project, we'll be able to pull that data into it and pull in all of our other data in our other systems. So it all combines into that system.
Right. We're gonna have all student data in one place.
Excellent.
This fall.
Wonderful.
It's the Panorama is truly the Cadillac version.
Yeah, it's great. We're really excited.
Yeah, I mean, there's things like the potential for being able to compare the academic progress with those social emotional surveys, and you can see it in a thing, at least at the high school level. I don't know so much at the elementary.
That's exactly
level,
right.
but
I mean, we'll
it's
see
pretty
behavior.
powerful.
That's right. We'll see behavior incidents. We'll see attendance. I mean, all data points will be in one place. We can really have a holistic view of our students in a way that we just haven't had.
Great. So I guess I'm with OnPing. We would love to see sampling.
Oh, we'd be happy to come back.
What it
Please.
looks like, some future date.
Yes.
And then one last thing I'm remembering, Emily Prenner with the Alphabet Soup, CRI, Culturally Responsive Instruction, UDL, Universal Design for Learning.
That's
Okay.
right.
Just for folks out there who might be wondering.
Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you both.
And Castle.
Oh, and Castle.
The Collaborative for Academic and Social Emotional Learning.
Great. All right. Well, thank you both so very much. Thank you. Appreciate it. And thank you, Stephen, for the. I was wondering what was going to happen, but that made total sense. All right. So up next, we're joined by Liam Hurley, Assistant Superintendent, Chief Financial and Administrative Officer, for a fiscal and operational update, our number 5 on the year. So Liam, will you be joined by a few members of the team, you think?
Yes, good evening. I think Sean and Alyssa are going to be joining.
Okay, so Sean Mannion, Director of Finance, Alyssa Behringer, Senior Budget Analyst, and Alyssa's cat. Hello.
Okay, good evening. So obviously good timing, I think, to talk certainly about our FY23, where we are right now. It's interesting, my experience here in Newton, obviously our budgets are linked. This year is linked to next year and future years. So it's been more so here than other districts. And so we certainly have been in my tenure, been able to basically land in a positive position, and we continue to do so here. So things have gotten slightly better from the last report, and I think they're going to continue to do so. You know, we've had kind of this basically slow down on purchasing since January, which has been very, very helpful from our perspective, but obviously sometimes challenging. But we certainly want to make sure we purchase everything we can. So right now we're at 67% spent or encumbered in our budget, which is a very similar spot that we have last year. It's a good number to track just to see if there's any real anomaly changes. Again, much of our expenses, almost 90% are certainly salaries and benefits. So it's just a good number to track. A couple of things that I would just continue to point out here: salaries and benefits have continued to trend in our favor. Again, that's the biggest portion of our budget. The benefits, I think we have less folks on the benefit rosters than we had anticipated. So that has helped us with that. The utilities have been steady, but again, some of the utilities are really expected to go up significantly next year with our budget and some of the contracts that are coming up, and also our usage. The maintenance line, just to, we'll talk about that, and we're going to talk about that coming up in this, in the next segue in terms of FY24. We are over there, and that has been an area we've historically been over, so almost $460,000 over budget. Number of things, particularly one-time larger expenses, have hit us this year, which has been typical for us. Again, the mayor's office has been very helpful and has been there to help us out. They're going to be spending some money on the Underwood roof, which is really helpful for us at that building. I mentioned contracted services. We are over on that area as well. I know in particular student services has been particularly in terms of some temporary staffing for some of its needs that we've not been able to fill. They've had to be able to reach out, and this is something we've done in the past, but the need is there for some of those services. I would say tuition, it is interesting to see we are 3 more placements than we were last year at this time. I think it's just a trend. I do want to, it's close. It's still a relatively low number for us at 124 students. It will be interesting to see with the rise in the tuition rates that these out-of-district schools could put, placing on everybody, whether or not I think it's really a function of them having the capacity to take in more students. So this will be, this is an important number for us to track. And as we've talked about over the last 10 years, we've been really steady in this almost $12 to $13 million gross tuition number. We're bumping that certainly significantly for next year. We've got the help of the one-time circuit, credit for next year. So apologize, I'm mixing kind of this year and next year, but they are really are linked. And I think it's important as we think about the context. Transportation, and this has been an area that, again, I'd say this is almost really a COVID impact as well. Particularly student service, our special education van transportation. We've got a significant savings there. We have our students riding on vans, but in many cases, there are, more students on those vans than we typically would like, and in some cases, longer routes than we would like. We certainly want students under an hour on these transportation. We have 2 main vendors, and they're doing their best, and they're continuing to they've got some promotions to try and hire staff, but it's a challenging field right now. Supplies and equipment. I think the equipment piece is a little bit of overage on that. Has been some areas with some instructional equipment, particular personal computers for both staff and for our students. And then certainly the move for NECP, we needed to buy some equipment and supplies for them to move in their space. Athletics, we've been talking about in the preschool, we use the term subsidy, but basically we bring money into their account to cover their expenses. The athletics portion has been a little bit higher. We've been trying to bump that. And as the school committee is aware, for next year, we're recommending a fee increase. That should help a little bit in that area, but it is an area. And we're also for next year also talking about reducing their budgets a little bit. So that will be a challenge for them. But it's something that they continue to experience, their costs have gone up for particularly coaches and transportation for their items. We have a little bit of pieces here that we've talked about in the past on our fee waiver process. Again, 99% of students that applied were accepted. Almost to 12% of the NPS students receiving some type of financial support. So we really want to make it very, very user friendly for families and make sure that they're not denied. So that's really it. I mean, I think I would just point out, we're showing a balance of approximately $1.2 million, but there's also, if you look closely, there's something called a budget reserve line item of another $1 million. Our expectation right now is that we're not going to need that. So that would put us at approximately $2.2 million. That number is important to remember as we think about as we think about the budget that I'm just about to talk about here, because we're actually going to be recommending dipping in further than the current $2 million. So our assumption is that we continue to get better through June 30th, but that again takes on more risk, and it is again more one-time money. And when I hear the term building a sustainable budget, I don't love doing it, but I think for some of the requests and some of the add backs we talk about, that's been one of the pieces that we thought about doing versus going to find other staffing to reduce. So again, apologies for mixing the fiscal years here, but they really are linked. And I think it's helpful just to keep in mind. So FY23 in good shape, we're going to land in a good position. One of the things we also think about at the year end, and we have in years past, depending on where we've landed, thought about areas where we could use one-time money. So for example, IT is an area, north and south, there are gyms, getting some equipment has been an area. Richard King has given me a 5-page memo on music instruments, almost $200,000 of music instruments. He's talking, he's telling me that, things are frayed, and he needs some things. So that's an area that I will continue to report on. But if we're in a position where to do anything, there's some areas that I know that we've got some need to support our programs. So that ends the fiscal report. Happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Liam. Questions from the members? Very good, as usual.
Okay.
Thank you. So, let's see, we'll now continue on to our discussion and review of the FY 24 budget. At the end of our last meeting on Tuesday morning, we tabled a conversation, or tabled a motion seeking additional restorations in order to permit Kathy and her team the time that was, needed. Sorry, let me start that over. We tabled consideration of a motion seeking additional restorations. We tabled it because Kathy and her team needed time to pull together historical data that would be helpful to us in our review. So Kathy, Liam, Assistant Superintendent of Secondary Education, Toby Romer, I'm assuming you can all speak to the information that you've been able to pull together, and then you can talk about the final add back recommendations that you have for us to consider.
Thank you, Tamika. As you stated, when we left the last meeting, one of the questions posed by Kathy Shields was to see if we had historical data, and we were specifically talking, I believe, about middle school class sizes. So Assistant Superintendent Toby Roma prepared going back actually 10 years. So you're back to FY 14, the 13-14 school year. And I think what's important about this is, you know, we talk about the needs, we talk about, you know, post-pandemic. So it really does give you some information. So I'd like to ask Toby to come up here. And before we talk about any add backs, I'd like to share that information you're requesting.
Thank you, Superintendent. Yeah, I think everyone has a copy of the memo that I prepared outlining the impact of the two different tiers of possible budget reinstatements on the largest team sizes across the 4 middle schools. So as you can see in the memo, there are 3 particular teams that were in the 98 to 100 students per team range, and that those were the staff additions, the reinstatements that we prioritized in the initial tier of restorations that would bring those team sizes and therefore class sizes back down into more of an expected range outside of the range. The next tier of reinstatements, specifically the 8th grade at Day and Brown, where the team sizes are projected to be 96 and 97 students per 97 and 96 in that order per our enrollment projections. The question was, what is a priority on those? So looking at the table on the second page of that memo, you can see the largest team sizes in our middle schools over the last 10 years, and 96 teams of 96 and 97 are not uncommon in that time period. You can also see the range of smaller team sizes as well there. So that actually, I think, is helpful information for everybody and speaks for itself. Happy to answer questions if there are questions about that specific set of data that was provided.
Thanks, Toby. Questions? Go ahead, Kathy.
So Toby, thank you so much for doing this. The question I have is not about the data you provided, but about some additional clarification. There's some, what I think may be some misunderstandings circulating that I thought it might be helpful to have you clear up about 2-person teams versus 4-person teams. I have heard some commentary that given the current recommended cuts, students in middle school are facing the likelihood, if these cuts were approved, of being taught by teachers who are not certified to teach the subjects they're teaching. And I wonder if you could address that, because I think that's something we need to clear up.
Yeah, well, first of all, 2-person teams are common in our middle schools. We have 2- and 4-person teams, depending on typically the number of students in the grade and the configuration that works. But again, just to review for everyone, a 4-person team is where you have 4 content area teachers who work closely together with that team of students. It's typically you have 1 English, 1 math, 1 science, and 1 social studies teacher on a 4-person team. In a 2-person team, you have half as many students and you have half as many teachers, and you'll typically have 1 teacher teach both the English and the social studies classes or the humanities related classes, and 1 teacher teach the math and the science related classes. And so there's advantages and disadvantages to each model. You certainly have the familiarity with your students as a teacher and knowing a smaller number of students and being able to make connections with them and their families. You're responsible for 2 different subject areas,
which requires extra preparation and expertise. So that's just an overview of the two models that we're talking about. So typically we try to have teachers on those two-person teams that have dual licensure in both areas, either English and social studies or math and science. We do have a rare number of cases where that may not be possible based on the licensure of folks in a particular building, particularly in a year like this where we're making a shift. It has happened before when we've had to shift from 4-person teams to 2-person teams. Typically we were working with a teacher to help them get licensure in another area and supporting them with content expertise. And typically we do that with our best teachers. And whatever, all our teachers are terrific, of course, but you know, I think families that have been on those 2-person teams where in those rare cases somebody's still working on adding a second licensure have been very happy with it because they're getting a quality experience. And again, our teams work very closely with one another. They also work with other teachers in content areas in their grade level, typically in grade level department teams. So they're getting support not only from their colleagues as well as from our district content coordinators. This is a long answer to your question, but hopefully helpful detail. And all that to say, we haven't done our teaching assignments yet. We don't know what teams and teachers we're going to have, so I can't specifically answer the question, will that happen next year? It's very unlikely. It has happened before. It could happen this year based on the final amount of staffing we're providing to each school and the work the principals have to do to configure the teams.
Thanks, that's helpful.
Yep.
Yeah, go ahead, Paul.
Just so we're absolutely clear, I think I'm clear, but the 6 positions, 2 at each at Oak Hill, Day and Brown, plus the multi-team increase, that's already in the priority 1 listing. Correct. You said before.
Yep.
Okay. So the ones that remain as possibilities would be the additional Day and Brown positions, which are 2 and 2, but then you need another 1.25 in each of those schools to make it work.
Yeah.
Right. So that would be in the list number 2, totaling the $600,000 more or less, right? Okay. And it's those that you say are more or less typical of the sizes that we've seen in the past, though.
Yeah, as you can see, they're comparable to the largest team sizes we've had in the last 10 years.
Okay. And good, thank you.
Any other questions or oh, go ahead, Co.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask, you know, when you look at the 2 and the 4-person team, and I guess I know I've kind of asked this before, but do you feel like it's harder to have a 2-person team at the 8th grade than it is, say, at the 6th grade? I mean, that's, I guess,
Yeah.
it means, so I see that the class sizes are going to be similar to what you've had before,
Yep.
but, you know, in my experience, it's harder to do that the higher in the grades you
Absolutely,
go.
yeah. The level of content expertise
math
and
and
preparation
science.
needed, particularly math and science, is definitely something we look at. We've depending on the number of teams and the configurations, we've had some different scenarios where we have people teaching across grades in math or in science. It's much harder to schedule, and with our what I would call typically medium-sized middle schools, we often don't have the critical mass of folks in each content area, even in our larger grades, to do that. So we typically have done 2-person teams, even at 7th and 8th grade, when we have the number of students that indicates like that's going to give us the right class size. Otherwise, you end up having very, very small team sizes, very large investment of resources for a certain number of students if you're trying to just keep 4-person teams everywhere you go, because it's just a function of how many students are enrolled in each school in each grade at any given time. And the buffer zones that we have really do a great job of managing enrollment at the elementary class size level. But when then those at multiple elementary schools are feeding to one middle school, we can't also use the buffer zones to manage middle school team size and try to have, you know, round numbers for 4-person teams everywhere. So the short answer to your question is yes, it's not as advantageous in the 7th and 8th grade, but it's certainly something that we've done before and need to continue to do to manage class size.
Okay, yeah, and I just see that those additional additions are both for the 8th grade, so.
Yep.
One more clarification.
Sure. Thanks, Co.
Thanks. Liam, just again, to be sure we're talking about the same numbers. On the second page of tonight's handout, you have the revised fiscal 24 budget number after OPEB is removed from both the cost and the revenue side. of 268,655,413. That includes the priority restoration list number 1. That's correct?
That's correct, Paul. It is, but it also does include some reductions that we need to make subsequently to make the priority list number 1 happen.
So, yes, both sides of the coin are necessary, right? Thank you.
Other questions, comments? So I'm going to throw it to you, Paul, because it's your motion that we tabled Tuesday morning. So with regard to that, how would you like to proceed?
Thank you. First, an explanation. You know, we've had a lot of meetings.
So many you forget.
So many we forget. And they kind of take on their own momentum as we go along, and we get very involved in what we're discussing. I think it's because we all care a lot about the ultimate result. And I think we all have our own individual priorities within the broad budget priorities that we've voted upon. And that's what was motivating me the other day to make that motion. Upon considering, actually it was Cove's comments that night when we asked Kathy and team to go back and redo again, and you basically said something like, well, you're asking to redo it, what they've already done, in response to our broad budget priorities that we all agreed on months ago. And I actually took that to heart. And it seems to me that at this point, even if I were to feel strongly about these last possible additions, it doesn't feel appropriate to me to continue with the motion, to dive into that and to have a discussion, because we're at the point of scalpeling back and forth savings and costs and so on, that in my mind should be left to the discretion of our new superintendent as the year goes along. In general terms, when we vote on a budget, we're voting on kind of our view of things at a slice in time, today projecting for a year in advance, knowing perfectly well that the superintendent and the team are going to make changes during the course of the year for a lot of reasons. It might be contingencies that occur, might be changes in priorities, might be any number of things that occur. And it seemed to me that to go further down that path at this point, by prescribing another set of changes, would reduce the flexibility that Dr. Nolan would have in using the judgment we've hired her for to make those kinds of decisions. That's a long explanation for why I'm not going to raise the motion again. I will say, I think we would all feel this, that there are certain things in here that we would like to be different based on our own personal priorities and things we've heard from the community. But there's a point where we have to say, let's let the professional management team manage within the broad $250 million that we're allocating here. And that to focus on $600,000 out of $250 million at this point seems to be not a prudent use of our time.
I won't disagree, and I don't think you'll get many takers on that either. However, I will say, in my mind at least, we're at a reasonable period of review of the budget where it might be prudent to have final thoughts come forward and then have one of you make a motion with regard to the budget and approval thereof. Chris?
Can I ask one question?
Yep.
Just on what was presented here on the restorations.
Mhm.
So Liam, you were saying we're projected to finish the year with the 1.2 surplus plus $1 million of reserve that was unused. So effectively 2.2 million to go into next year, right?
Correct. Yes.
On the tier 1 and the tier 2 restorations here, we have utilization of 283,000 and 214,000 for a total of 497,000 of carry forward. Is the rest of that roughly 1.7 million? Is that scattered throughout? Is that just getting carried forward as a reserve for next year?
So as we think about the two pieces, what I'm going to call the sources, we had in the first tier here, so I'm just going to move this piece here, 283,000. As I just reported, we're essentially at $2.2 million. We have the 1.2 plus the $1 million in the budget reserve. If we were to, so I'm comfortable, Chris, I'm even comfortable. I mean, we'll be taking on more risk on the second reserve line for the priority list number 2. Excuse me, it's not moving for me. We would need then an additional 214,000. So I then, and with Sean, so we'll be again doing another fiscal report to you folks in June. We're not yet at that point of identifying that 214,000, but this is the risk that we thought that we needed to try to take. And I put that in there, taking on more risk. So I'm essentially, we're at 2.2 carrying forward, and this additional 214,000 has not yet been identified, but I'm confident, I think given the way that our trends have been right now, that we're going to get there at the end of the year.
So I might be missing something obvious.
Sure.
And I'm thinking about this, like, let's think of sources, uses for next year. We have 2.2 million of projecting 2.2 million of for year 23 carry forward as a source for next year.
Yeah.
Is that 2.2 million already encumbered with uses completely? And
so the 2 million, the 2 million has been part of our plan. Our carry forward has been part of the base budget.
2 million.
2 million on the nose.
So now
So
it's 2.2.
2. So then the first round of restoration, we would need 2.2. If we were to add the second tier of priority, funding, we'd need essentially 2.4, a little bit more than 2.4. And again, it would be taking some risk on, but I'm comfortable we could get there.
It all just came clear.
Okay.
It all just
All right.
clicked.
All
That
right.
was I was conflating two things in my mind. Thank you.
Others? Paul?
Go again. Thanks. First, I want to say that I think this has been a very good process. Madam Chair, what you asked Emily and me to do earlier in the year in terms of working on overall budget priorities and bringing it back to this body, I hope Kathy and the staff found to be helpful as we went through. I think it was helpful to us. So hopefully to both of us. That's one point I want to make. The other, and I'm comfortable voting on the budget as it now stands. The other request I'm going to make of our mayor is, I know you've been reserving some of the ARPA money for potential future COVID related items. I'd like you to please consider that what the current third graders are going through over the next 2 years is a one-time COVID-related trauma. And as that cohort of students gets older, they will need less support than they need now. We're recognizing that need for more support in the restoration list that Kathy has given us by restoring roughly $500,000 in costs to not lay off those elementary school teachers. I think doing that is intimately related to COVID. And I know you have a lot of other things you have to work on, Mayor Fuller, and a lot of tough choices for the city government as a whole, and I totally respect that. I'm just putting in a gentle plug to please think about that $500,000 this year and probably next year as well as the kind of one-time COVID-related expenses that ARPA, that the people who passed ARPA probably had in mind. Don't need to answer that right now if you don't want to. It's just a gentle request. Other than that, Tamika, I didn't have anything to add.
Sure. Thanks, Paul. Go ahead, Mayor Fuller.
It's an important question, an important and lovely, tactful way of talking about it. And it certainly is one that's been raised by other school committee members, by members of the public, by parents, by caregivers, by educators. So I respect the question and understand the question. I'd say a couple different things. It is crystal clear, I think, to all of us, the impact of the pandemic on all level of students is real and ongoing. I unfortunately listened like you to your good question and the good answer by Jesse Krodik just a few minutes ago. I actually, unfortunately, am coming to the conclusion that the need for the ongoing support for social and emotional teaching and learning, for academics, for the personalized, equitable teaching we need to do is actually a permanent feature for the decades ahead. This is not a 1 or 2 year thing. So I think we actually have to build this in permanently. I do not see this actually disappearing in a year or two, unfortunately. Now, maybe I'm more pessimistic than I need to be. So I will continue to look at ways that ARPA funding, operating funding, debt funding, you name it, can be supportive to our children. The Newton Public Schools continue to be my highest priority, and I will continue to look for ways financially to support the important work that we're doing.
Thank you.
Thank you. Final thoughts, comments, last questions. Emily, yes, and then Kathy.
So just to understand procedurally, someone, I assume, will make a motion and will specify whether or not it is just priority 1 list or 1 and 2, because we haven't had that discussion yet. I know, Kathy, you had asked for specific information about impact that I was very interested in hearing in terms of impact of the 4 additional priority list 2, and whether or not, given the trade-offs, if that was something that we were interested in pursuing. And I feel like we haven't had that conversation yet at all.
So Kathy Shields, go ahead.
So I was actually, I don't know if you meant me, Kathy.
No, you, Kathy. You, Kathy.
I was going to make a motion that would respond to Emily's suggestion. And do you want me to do that now, or do you want to do something else first?
Motion, sure. Yes.
So I'm going to make a motion that we approve the superintendent's budget with the items identified on priority list number 1, both in terms of restorations and funding sources for those restorations. I'm happy to talk about why, or I can come back to that if others want to.
So the motion has been made. Is there a second on the motion?
Kathy, I'm sorry, because so many things I want to understand well.
How about, hold on 1 second. Let's have Kathy repeat the motion.
Please.
We're going to have a second on the motion, and then we'll discuss, and then we'll get to your question first off.
So my motion is that we approve the superintendent's budget with the list of restorations identified on priority list number 1, and with the sources of funds for those restorations identified at the top of the page on first round sources of funds for priority list number one. That's my motion. Does that make
So
sense?
is there a second? 1 second. Is there a second on the motion? Paul, go ahead.
There is just to clarify the motion, just a little bit. Can you just say the budget in the amount of 268,655,413?
Including the 1.4 million.
No, she already says that. Because that's why I asked the question earlier about whether that 268 included the priority one restorations and the like, and Liam said yes. So I just think it's good to have in the motion the actual dollar amount.
Friendly amendment.
That makes the total amount of the budget that we would be approving $268,655,413.
Second.
All right, so we've had a motion and a second on the budget. On Ping, do you still have a question?
Basically, my question probably it's a little bit too naive, but what about the priority two?
So my motion.
Why it's separated? Because there's some challenges, something we need to discuss?
Yeah, so I'm happy to talk about why I'm making the motion that I'm making. So in looking at all of this from my point of view, the items that we have restored funding for in priority list number one are the most critical pieces for us to move forward for the good of all of our students. I think it is my view, particularly with the data that Toby provided us with this week, that I think, I don't know whether you call it a sledgehammer or a scalpel, but doing further digging in the superintendent's recommendations to fund the items that are on priority list number one, or I'm sorry, on priority list number two, I think are not justified, because what we would be doing is trying to make changes to things that the superintendent and her team have sort of used their best judgment in how to allocate, when the results of those changes would be trying to undo something that is essentially the way we've been doing things for a number of years. I mean, it would be an attempt, in my view, to undo team sizes of 96 and 97 students, which we have had as largest team sizes on a number of occasions over the last 10 years. Understanding that our students today do face additional challenges, even with those, but I think we need to put it in context of what's the payoff for the damage we would be causing in other areas of the budget. And I guess from my perspective, the payoff is not there.
I see.
So that's my point of view.
Yeah, I just want to try to understand your motion, why not include the priority list too? Okay, you explain well, thanks.
Thank you, On Ping. Go ahead, Emily, and then Paul.
I just want to add something to what Kathy said, which is I also think that the sources of funding for priority two makes there will be impacts in the secondary school. I think about the cutting of the 2 counseling and mental health staffing, which is an area that I really would be very, very, very reluctant to touch. So that's what I wanted to add. Oh, and also the fees would become definitely more onerous for families, but focusing on the mental health in high schools, a very high priority.
Thanks, Emily. Go ahead, Paul.
And just piling on the same theme, I agree with both of those comments. I also don't like the idea of the additional risk associated with more of a carryover, the additional $214,000, given the balance of the benefits and the costs. So I agree with both Kathy and Emily on those points.
Chris? Thank you, Paul.
Yeah, so I mean, I took the Kathy's inclusion of the mental health staffing as sort of her indication to us that there's nowhere left to go. And I don't think anyone here would be okay with cutting that, is my off the cuff guess. So that was I think that was Kathy's polite way of letting us know we've hit the bottom. That being said, I mean, I'm going to take the other side of the middle school class sizes and justification of what team sizes were pre-pandemic having any relevance today. I mean, We just heard something completely different from that. I also, still am uncomfortable with us just BSing the maintenance line again. And as we're, Liam's reporting, we're $500,000 over. We were I think Paul last year did the little piece of analysis. It's averaged something between $500,000 and $1 million or something like that for a long time. So, to me, that's, we're just making it up, at that point. So I'm not comfortable with that.
Thank you, Chris.
Just one more. I know you're getting tired of hearing me.
Well, hold on one
Yeah.
second. Anyone who hasn't had an opportunity to share and who would like to first? Go ahead, Rajiv.
Just very briefly, Chris talked about comfort with the budget. I'm not at all comfortable with the budget. Actually, I'm very uncomfortable with the budget and where we landed. I do think it reflects some incredibly difficult work by the superintendent and her team and the principals and department heads going across our schools. And possibly like most other things is the terrible compromise, but one we have to move forward with. So I'm comfortable with voting on the budget. I'm not comfortable with the budget itself. I hope we see the city in a better fiscal situation. I hope we see some of the revenue streams that have been depressed for a couple of years come back. I hope we're in a better place next year. So fingers crossed on that. We will obviously do the absolute best we can within these constraints.
Thank you, Rajiv. Cove or Mayor Fuller? You also haven't spoken.
No, I mean, I agree with Rajiv. I'm not comfortable where we ended up, and I think that there will be trade-offs, there will be repercussions, even, I am still concerned about the middle school positions because I think you are talking about things like we've talked about academic excellence, and I think that these are the cuts that even if you have equal class size, you're not going to have the same attention to the content. I think I know we have great teachers and we have creative solutions, so I'm sure that we'll figure out some ways, but I'm not comfortable with that, but I also realize that we don't have any place else to go. And I similarly hope that we will be in a better position someday, to pay attention to those things.
Thanks, Cove. Mayor Fuller?
I'm still putting together the exact words I'll stay on Monday night when I deliver the overall budget for the city of Newton. But I would say I share the discomfort of the educators in the room, of my fellow school committee members. This is not the outcome that any of us wanted. And there are very real trade-offs being made. I am fully aware of it, and it makes me just as uncomfortable as I would say anybody else in the room. So I will do my best to manage the city as effectively as we can and look both at the revenue side and the expense side, not only within the Newton Public Schools, but within all our departments. The Newton Public Schools represents about 65% of our entire budget, and some of the other ones are literally fixed costs. So there's oddly enough, the opportunities to make changes are more here than anywhere else. And you can see how difficult and awful those trade-offs are, particularly when you're talking about our children.
Mayor Fuller, and my own thoughts, and then I'll throw it back to you, Paul. My own thoughts are picking up on the thread Rajiv and Cove shared as to the hopes of being in a better financial future. I'm going to add a hope that our voters in Newton, at some point in the near future, we will very likely have to most probably entertain another operating override to assist our schools to do all of the many wonderful things that we hope our schools can do, our staff can do, and that our students deserve. I hope this time period has really cemented itself in the minds of our community such that when that time comes and we need that assistance, they'll be able to remember and really see the value in investing in the Newton Public Schools in a way that I hope that they will. I'm gonna now pick up on a thread from you, Chris. Speaking as a co-taught or a half-team parent, the half-team experience has been wonderful for my children. Their teachers have been incredibly competent and caring, and I imagine this is the same experience that there would be on a team of 4 or a team of 2. So pre-pandemic, the data that Toby pulled for us, I think I'm moved with where Kathy is right now, which is to say that the levels of that our class sizes then are commensurate with our class sizes now, and that we have a really thoughtful model in place to address those needs. And the building staff as a whole are there to support our students. I think I join everyone in recognizing that this isn't the budget we would hope to have passed, but it's the one that's in front of us. And I think Kathy and her team have done an incredible job of trying to pull together the most essential, the most high priority pieces and preserving them. So that's what we have in front of us. With that, Paul, I'll throw it back to you.
Thank you. I would just seek to remind us and members of the public who are watching that a budget is a blueprint. It's not a prescription. And the manner in which the money will be spent and allocated and the decisions that will be made month to month will be made by our new superintendent, who has a tremendous amount of authority. Indeed, for the most part, acting on her own, even without school committee approval of individual steps, to make level of service decisions in terms of administrative costs, in terms of other costs for the school system, to respond to contingency events that occur or that might not occur, to use the 2 positions we have in reserve for the elementary schools or not, as the case may be, and to make modifications that in her judgment are in the best interest of our children. We went through a very extensive search process and found a wonderful, experienced, thoughtful, prudent superintendent who's going to start in just a few months. And I think we should feel quite comfortable, notwithstanding the cuts that have had to be made, that we've hired a person with the expertise to navigate through the next year with these $250 million that we've allocated and do a very good job for our students. Final thing I want to say on this budget is to also thank Kathy and the team for all their work on it, and to thank Kathy for her work throughout the year, which I think put us in the position to have a very thoughtful, deep, and rigorous discussion on the budget that she presented. So thank you, Kathy, for all of your work. And I'll leave it at that.
Thank you, Paul. Kathy?
I know how this feels, and I comment every time I come here, and am just amazed at the people that care about our schools, that are truly dedicated to the outcomes for all our students. So I think 2 things that I want to say. One is, and thank you for saying that about the team. Because truth be told, we began this work in the fall. We took many of our meetings and in January, we were tasked with, and I was just looking at the priorities that were set with a dual budget. That was the expectation during a very difficult time in late January. And we worked many meetings, and not just the meetings I had with my team, they went back to their teams. They spent time, as you said, with the principals, the department heads, and truly tried to be hopeful. And at the same time, we had to make some, as you said, some difficult decisions. So thank you, because there are so many things that, I would call a meeting and we gave up some of the time spent in schools, some of the time spent in doing things that we actually really enjoy doing. And I think lastly, I want to say this to the community, that this school committee has worked, and I've been around, you hear me always say how much I've been around, but has worked harder than any committee I have ever worked with. And this was obviously, we had an override on the ballot. We were out there talking to groups, to parents, to community members, virtual, in person, continuing the message that really hasn't changed. So if you go back and listen to what we talked about, unfortunately, it's where we are today. And I know I shouldn't continue to bring this up, but when I look at that $4.5 million in the operating budget and I look at where we landed, we were pretty much on target. I remain as hopeful as you do. But again, I want to thank each and every one of you that stood at PTO meetings with us, that were out there, speaking to groups, even during this difficult budget process. I know the support you have provided to your entire community. I'm also very excited about Dr. Nolan coming on board. She again is walking into a district that, again, there are some challenges, but I feel there is light at the end of the tunnel. We clearly understand this budget. We understand, and we've shared that message with the community of where we need to go. And I don't think this has really ended. I mean, obviously, this is a budget that you will vote on, but the work continues, and I know the team and the commitment that they will have to the students in Newton, and I look forward to seeing your next chapter. So thank you to everybody who worked really, really hard, spent hours of their time, gave up vacations. It's just amazing the work that you've done for your community. So thank you.
Thank you. Likewise. So we have a motion, we have a second, we've had a very lengthy conversation and an opportunity to ask additional questions. I think it's time to start our vote. Ward 1.
Yes.
Ward 2.
No.
Ward 3.
Yes.
Ward 4. Yes. Ward 5.
Yes.
Ward 6.
Yes.
Ward 7.
Yes.
Ward 8.
Yes.
And Mayor Fuller.
Yes.
So that motion passes 8-1. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. And thank you, Kathy, and thank you to a very beleaguered, overworked team. Thank you, everyone. So with that, we have concluded. Oh, thank you, Alyssa and Sean, for hanging in. See you guys later. With that, we've concluded the posted business for tonight's meeting. Our next meeting will be not tomorrow, but instead on Monday, May 8th. Lisa, we can go ahead and cancel that placeholder meeting for tomorrow. We will have, go ahead, Mayor Fuller.
I invite anybody who's available for Monday night at City Hall. I'm sure you'll be invited inside the rail if you're there. 7:45, City Council chambers.
Fabulous, thank you. So on Monday, May 8th, we will have an update on goals, including a social studies update from teaching and learning and a school council improvement plans update, as well as an analysis of our advanced placement exams. Thank you to our central staff and a big thanks to everyone who attended tonight. We appreciate it. Our meeting is now adjourned.
Recording.